Hello and welcome back everyone. This is Dawn with another video for Picket Studios. Today we're going to be doing some watercoloring to make a stamp set our own. So we're going to use the stamped image and then we're going to further enhance it with some hand painted elements. Now I'm going to be using the Autumn Bountiful Beauty stamp set today, and there's a lot of great images in here. You've got these pumpkins, a wagon, these great florals, some beautiful sentiments. And I used this in my last video for Picket Fence, and I used the floral cluster. Today we're going to be focusing on those pumpkins, and we're going to create just this little fall scene. I absolutely love adding my own hand-drawn elements to stamps. I think it's a great way to stretch them and kind of make them your own and different from anything that you would see anyone else create with the exact same stamp set. So I started out by laying out the stamps I know I'm going to use from the set to make sure that I have enough room to add the elements that I want to add. And I'm going to stamp this in Distress Ink and Antique Linen. This is my go-to for no line coloring, whether it's watercolor or Copic coloring. I'm working on Arches cold press watercolor paper, so there is a texture. You'll need multiple impressions. I am doing a little bit darker than I normally would, so I'm going to stamp this like 4 times, but that's so that you guys can clearly see it on camera as well. I've stamped that floral cluster, and I only need a portion of this pumpkin, so I'm only inking up the 2 pumpkins on the left, and I'm avoiding inking up that smaller pumpkin because it's behind the flower. This is going to alleviate me having to do any sort of masking. So now that my stamping is done, it's time to jump into the watercolor. And I obviously have this in fast motion. I am nowhere near this quick, you guys. I am incredibly slow. I take my time. So don't let the fast pace fool you. All right, so I'm going to start with the florals here. And I've done a lot of videos on my channel where I've watercolored florals and given some in-depth instruction. You can check out playlists for that. And I've left in all the footage for painting this entire thing, but if you want to see it just a little bit slower, you can use your controls in YouTube to slow it down, but definitely, absolutely mute it if you do that. I'm gonna sound like a monster. All right, so if you're more interested in seeing the pumpkins, you can skip ahead to 5 minutes, about 5.5 minutes into the video. And if you're just interested in how I added those extra leaves and stuff to create the rest of this arrangement, you can skip to about 7 minutes or so. All right, so here, like I said, I've got a lot of videos on doing flowers. We're doing this, it's kind of a mix between loose and detailed. I'm laying down a light base of color for each petal, and then I will come in and drop in a little bit of heavier color in the kind of nooks and crannies of the flower. So wherever the petals are closer or clustered together, I'm going to drop in a little bit of heavier color. That would be like towards the center of the flower or the back petals, any of the petals that are in the back. And you can see here, I'm coming in with that second layer. Once that first layer was dry, I can come in here with that second layer and add just a little bit of depth of color to the nooks there where the petals behind the front petals are showing through. This will just deepen up those petals and give the flower a little bit of depth. I'm not going to go overboard or get too hung up in the details here. A little bit of color is all you need, especially with florals. They're very, very forgiving. I have said it for years and years. You can put leaves on a blob of color and it will read as a flower. It is absolutely true. So here for the second flower, I like to start with the centers. I pretty much always start with the center of a flower. I like having that color there in the center so that when I go to start to do the petals, if my wet brush touches that center, I get that nice little bleed of whatever color is in the center out into the petals. And that just kind of, to me, that's the beauty of watercolor, those color bleeds. So I take advantage of that as often as possible. But you can see here that I'm laying down a very light wash of color, and then I come in with my heavier color. So you really, really want to concentrate on building color with watercolor. You always start with your lights and you build up to your darks. There is no white. There's a white in watercolor, but it's technically gouache. So normally the white of the paper serves as your white or your highlights. Here I'm adding a little extra depth to those florals, but again, I'm not going to get hung up in the details. I kind of broke my own rules in this particular painting. Normally, I like to lay down my first wash of color for everything and then come in and add my second layer of color for everything. This way, I'm working everything to the same level of detail and I don't get hung up in any one area. and then I can sometimes end up overworking paintings when that happens. So if you have an issue with overworking your watercolor, try that method. Paint everything to the same level. So your first light wash of color, do everything with that. Let that dry and then come in and work your detail layer or your darker layer. And then come back in again after everything dries and add your deep darks to everything. Trust me, it really helps to see the entire composition with some color added to it, whether it's just the wash or the details. It does. It really, really helps. I'm running into, I almost overworked these flowers. I did overwork them a tiny bit. And had I went ahead and done the pumpkins and then came back to the flowers, I think I would have avoided that. So now we're on to the pumpkins. I'm imagining a light source here in the upper right-hand corner. So I'm going to add my shadows in the lower left and then around the bottom and anywhere that the flowers would be blocking the light, or the pumpkin behind this pumpkin, anywhere it would be blocking the light. Again, I'm leaving that white of the paper to serve as my highlights. And then I'm adding deeper color in between each segment of the pumpkin so that it looks like those segments are rounded. They have a very bulbous, very rounded, bulbous shape. And so by adding that darker color in between those sections and then leaving those brighter highlights around the center, and in this case, because of my light source in the upper right, it's going to really, really enhance and give that rounded sectioned look. So now I've moved on to the blue-gray pumpkin back here, and this one's gonna have a lot of shadow to it because it's behind not only a pumpkin but that cluster of flowers. So the majority of the light is going to just hit that top right-hand side. Again, just like with the peachy pumpkin there, I'm gonna add some darker depth to the back side of the pumpkin that's facing away from my light source, the underneath of the pumpkin where it is completely blocked from any light right in here, and then between each of those sections of the pumpkin, we're just going to enhance that depth. For the stems, I'm going to add a light wash of brown there. You can see I just put down a little bit of color and then I'm going to leave it. And now we're going to work on adding in our extra leaves to really build out this composition. I wanted to create kind of a semi-wreath, floral-ish type feel. So I took a pencil and I drew in some stems. This is going to give me a guide for where to put my leaves. And I'm going to work in sections because I like my paint to bleed and mix. So I put down a section of my stems and now I'm just putting in my leaves here. I'm using that number 5 round brush. The round brushes are great for creating leaves. The belly of that brush and the tip of that brush is shaped just like a leaf. So by doing a simple push, pull, and lift, you're going to get the perfect leaf. And I've given classes on this, and I've also explained this in other videos. Leaves are so easy, you guys. That round brush just makes it so easy. You just push, pull, lift. That's it. So easy. So here I'm just continuing to build out this leaf segment here. Again, working in sections, adding a little bit of stem, putting in my leaves, then adding a little more stem, and then putting in my leaves. And this is so fun, so easy, and it really does create, like I said, a composition with this stamp set that nobody else is going to have created. We won't say nobody else. The chances of that are probably slim, but nobody's will look exactly like yours because everybody has different styles, different painting techniques. So you could use this as a guide and paint it in a slightly different technique, maybe more loosely or maybe more detailed, and yours would look different. For some interest, I'm going to add in some of these aqua colored leaves here. These are going to be much lighter. They're going to serve as a landing place or a bed for these pumpkins to be sitting on. And I don't want them to draw too much attention. I really just want them to complement that blue pumpkin there in the background. So this is a great way to kind of marry that smoky blue with the green by using this aqua that's kind of a mix of blue and green. Now these ones are just a tiny bit more concentrated in color because they're in the foreground, but we're going to add some weaved in with that green stem there at the top, and we're going to go much lighter with this. So the paint, we're using the same color, we're just going to dilute it. I'm waiting for that branch to completely dry before I add those in though. So in the meantime, I added in the little leaf on the pumpkin, and now I'm coloring or painting these little floral sprigs that Kelly included in this little floral cluster. Oh my goodness, by the way, I didn't even mention my bestie. Kelly Taylor is the illustrator of this stamp. She did such a great job, and I could not wait to use it. I've wanted a nice pumpkin, a nice good outline pumpkin stamp for ages. I think that they are so fun to practice your coloring, your painting, or your coloring, but especially your watercolor, because you can really do some fun color blends on a pumpkin. All right, so here we go. Now we're adding in those lighter leaves that I was telling you about. So you can see here, I'm kind of mapping in with my hand and the brush here. I'm not touching the paper yet. I was kind of getting a feel for how the leaves might grow, because again, I'm working this behind our other leaves. You're not going to be able to see a lot of it. You're just going to be able to see some stems peeking out here and there, and then some leaves, not flowers, Dawn. So I kind of map it out, kind of move my hand to get that muscle memory going, and then I come to the paper. And again, these leaves are much lighter, so more water, less pigment. And that's going to help them kind of just fill out this branch, make it look a little fuller, but again, it doesn't look overly busy or heavy. All right, so once we have pretty much filled this out, I'm going to look for any bare spots that I feel need a little bit more something, and I can add those in. And you'll want to take your time with this. Again, this looks like I am moving extremely fast, and I am, only because I have sped this video up, you guys. I'm moving much slower than this. I'm taking my time, and I'm paying attention to what is necessary for the painting. That's it. Any holes or gaps. I want to create a balanced composition. So here we're adding a little bit more colors to those stems. This is where we come in and add those details, and you can really see how they pop now. By adding in those darker darks and leaving those lights very light, we add a lot of contrast and we give the illusion of a light source. So right over here I had a bare spot, so I'm going to just create another one of those little flower sprigs that was in the stamp set. I'm just going to hand paint one in. And this is going to create balance. We're going to have that rule of thirds there. So we have 3 little sprigs of those floral clusters. And I really, really like the way this is turning out. However, I know that I need just a little bit of that green stem over here on the right side, because my composition is a little off balanced, right? So I grab my sentiment here, I'm putting it in place, and I can already tell, yeah, I'm going to need to extend this out just a little bit. So again, this is where being able to kind of just add your own little touches and really build out this composition is a lot of fun. You could have chosen to maybe put another small pumpkin over here if you wanted. There's a lot of different ways that you could have balanced this. I just decided to go with the easy route here and add a few more little leaves. This also brings that brown over to the far right, that brown and green over to the far right. Absolutely love the way this turned out. Now there's a few more little details that I'll need to do. I've added in a couple of cast shadows there on the pumpkins. You can see there on the bottom of that pink pumpkin, I added just a little bit of a heavier shadow. And now I'm going to add some detail to these flowers right here. Not much. Just a simple, well-placed dot of color there really makes these flowers look like they have a foreground and a background. Do you see how we created like a little cup there on that flower? So easy to do. And again, it's just a well-placed blob of color. That's it. Add a little bit of contrast to that, and you instantly give this you separate petals, and they look more dimensional now. You could have skipped this part, but to me, this is where it's at. These little details that make it pop, this is where it's at. And for reference, we are now in real time, so this will give you a better idea of how slowly I'm actually moving for the entire painting, so you don't think that you have to rush through to do watercolor. Watercolor, you do have a time limit because you want to make sure that you're adding color while the paper is wet in a lot of instances, or while the paint is still wet, but there are many times that you have to wait for your paper to dry before you add another layer. So a lot of the times when you see fast motion watercolor, you think in your head that they're moving much quicker than they are because visually in the video they are, but in reality they are going much slower. So because of that, a lot of the times people tend to think that they have to move extremely quickly with watercolor. While you do have to move a little bit more quickly, you definitely don't have to have that false sense of urgency that you get when you're watching watercolor in fast motion. Take your time. You'll learn how much time you have before the paint dries. You'll learn how much time you have before your water evaporates. It's one of those things that you definitely have to do to learn. Watercolor depends on your climate, depends on your amount of water in your brush, depends on the amount of water you've already laid down on your paper, and there is no scientific way to measure all of that. So again, you have to do. The best way to learn is to do. Are you going to mess up sometimes? Absolutely. Absolutely. Are you going to be successful sometimes? Absolutely. So yeah, that's another one of my big tips for watercolor is you just have to do it. You just have to do it. Don't be afraid to waste paper or paint. You're learning something. And so there is no waste of paper or paint. Anytime you're learning, that is not a waste, not in my opinion. Plus, if you spend an hour or two practicing watercolor and it does end up being something you don't like, it was the cost of the piece of paper. So, I mean, is that really expensive for 2 or 3 hours of fun or entertainment or learning? Nah, I don't think so. I'd rather do that than watch a movie. But you may be different, and that's okay. All right, so we are pretty much almost done with this. I'm going to take a peek around. You can see I've kind of paused here, but I left this little lull in because this is me staring at it, assessing what else it needs. And now I've decided, you know what? I need just a few more well-placed darks or shadows, and that's it. I'm just going to add in a few more of these little hits of darker color, and that's just going to keep my leaves from looking flat. Not going for realism here, you guys. I cannot stress that enough. I'm just adding a little bit deeper color, and this is just for interest and depth. That's it. Some of these look a little washed out, and I'm intentionally going to leave them looking a little washed out. But on some of them, for a little bit of variance, I'm going to add a little bit of deeper color. I might add a vein down the line of 1 or 2 of the leaves. But anything that I am doing judiciously. I am not going to repeat the exact same thing to every leaf. I don't want them to look identical. I don't want them to look like I use some sort of formula to paint them or to color them. I want them to all be slightly unique. Okay, so now it is time to add our sentiment, and I've let this completely dry. Now I'm dry fitting my sentiments in here. I'm using the Beautiful Grateful from the stamp set here along with the little For You sub sentiment. And I'm going to stamp this in dark brown. I just thought these autumnal colors, the black would be a little too harsh. So this beautiful dark brown is going to stand out and be dark enough, but again, not be too harsh. So I'm going to stamp this a couple of times because again, we're stamping on textured cold press watercolor paper. And so in order to get a nice even impression, you'll want to stamp it a couple of times. This is where a stamping tool is a must for stamping on watercolor paper. I can't stress that enough. Now we're going to add in that little For You underneath. And this is pretty much done, you guys. The only thing I have left to do now is adhere this to my card base, and then we can go ahead and take a look at the final card. All right, so like I said, I adhered this to a card base. It turned out to be a 4 1/4 by 4 1/4 inch card. So I've trimmed down my panel to 4 by 4 and then adhered that to the craft card base and then finished it off with a little twine ribbon run through the fold of the card at the top. And I think that this is just simple and sweet, and I love the way I was able to transform those lined images into something really genuinely unique and true to me and my style. So hopefully you liked this video, you learned something, maybe you'll give it a try, let me know in the comments. And if you did, make sure you give this a thumbs up. Also, don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already so you don't miss any future videos. All of the featured products will be listed in the description box below if you're looking for those. And as always, I want to thank you so much for watching. I will see you next time.